Good morning. Welcome to this Domino 1 versus Articulate 360 head-to-head. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rebecca Clark. I'm the Services Director at Llama Brown, and I'll be facilitating this session today. Llama Brown is a content development, management and hosting company, and our content authors have a broad knowledge of e-learning content development tools accumulated over many years of project experience. We don't develop any software ourselves, although we choose to align with key vendors and are continuously evaluating the market to ensure we're able to discuss all potential solutions with our clients. Two of the most popular content authoring tools we use are Domino 1 and Articulate 360. So our authors have a lot of experience of both of these tools and have found that there are key differences that make the tools more appropriate in particular use cases, not least of which when it comes to designing learning content that's accessible. So accessibility in e-learning isn't just a nice to have, it's both a legal requirement and a responsibility that we have as designers to our learners. From a compliance perspective, WCAG 2.2 is the global benchmark for digital accessibility. These standards extend beyond the public sector. Higher education, healthcare and corporate organisations are all increasingly expected to ensure their digital training is accessible. And the implications of getting this wrong are significant. You can be looking at legal complaints, financial penalties, reputational damage, and the erosion of your learners' trust. But at its core, accessibility is about inclusivity. If our courses don't work with a screen reader, if captions and transcripts aren't provided, or if colour contrast makes it text unreadable, we're shutting out our learners before they even begin. True accessibility is about ensuring everyone has the opportunity to learn, not just checking a compliance box. But I will say the caveat that accessibility starts with strong instructional design. Without clear objectives, well-structured content, and a learner-focused approach, even fully accessible courses may fail to truly engage or support learners. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel for today. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, our content authors, Emma and Emily. Hi, guys.
Hi.
So Emma Hewlett is a content author and Llama Brown's accessibility lead. She has a professional certificate in accessibility and universal design and is passionate about creating inclusive e-learning content that benefits learners. Emily is a content author and has been working on development projects with Llama Brown since 2021, using both Domino 1 and Articulate Storyline and Rise. So, Emma and Emily, you have a lot of knowledge and experience around the accessibility features of Domino 1 and Articulate. Can you talk us through the features in each tool that support accessibility requirements and how much knowledge an author needs to have of accessibility to meet those requirements?
Yeah, so I'll start with Domino. So Domino's done a lot of the hard work in the background so that it's increasingly easy actually for authors to create accessible content. So a lot of the work is done in the background, in the write-up language, so that it supports assistive technology and it announces all the interactivity really well with screen readers. So it's taking a lot of that thinking away from the authors so that there's a wider choice of accessible interactions they can choose from. Just an example, in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, they improved the tab set sort of interaction so that it's gone from not just being a good interaction with a keyboard, but it actually now announces it brilliant for non-visual learners. In addition to that, I mean, talking about the keyboard accessibility, so most activities in Domino could be navigated by keyboard, and they've also fairly recently developed a new click alternative to a drag and drop activity as well. And as well as that, you've got lots of customizations that authors can create to avoid drag and drop and mouse reliant activities. So there's a lot of options within Domino to help you create that accessible content. And there is also, and I will touch on this a little bit later as well, there's also a new feature coming as well, which allows the author a little bit more control over sort of that background language without getting too sort of technical. It's an ARIA feature, so it's a feature that basically overrides essentially the coding of an element's initial intended purpose. So if you had an image that was actually acting as a button, that is now been, you can now override that as an author. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on the introduction, but basically, yeah, there's an awful lot going on within Domino that says that accessibility isn't actually an afterthought. it's sort of there from the beginning.
Okay. Do you think content authors need to know much about accessibility to make the most of those features, though?
Increasingly, there's more that seems to be done for you in dominKnow. So knowing that actually a lot of the features there, they have all that, all the language and things going on in the background to make sure that the assistive technology is picking up on those interactions really nicely. There are still a few features that aren't fully accessible. So the card sort activity that I mentioned, which is a click, really nice keyboard accessible version of a drag and drop activity. Great for keyboard users, not great yet for screen reader users. So I think unless you have that knowledge and you are maybe testing some of the content with screen readers, there's still an element of knowledge and skill that an author needs to have. And that ARIA feature that I mentioned, that is a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more technical. So that feature you wouldn't use unless you understand what you're doing, because yeah, you can make things a little bit worse. So I think generally some knowledge is always needed of accessibility, because you do need to be testing your content, and you need to understand how your learners are going to interact with your content. But there's an awful lot going on in dominKnow that makes that easier now for authors.
Okay, great. Emily, what about Articulate? How do Rise and Storyline hold up in terms of accessibility?
So I think it's worth pointing out that Rise and Storyline are obviously really different products to each other. Rise is sort of sold as a very sort of quick and easy course building software, very sort of not much of a learning curve to it. It's very intuitive. You're essentially sort of creating courses from a library of templated blocks. So similar to dominKnow, the developers have done the heavy lifting for us. We're just selecting what we want to do and we're sort of stacking them down the page. So compared to Rise, Storyline has got a really sort of steep learning curve. I'd say that it's more sort of, if you're used to using Microsoft PowerPoint, then it would be a lot easier to navigate around. But I think with all of these things, it's, and especially Storyline, the more complex you make your design, and by complex, I would sort of define that as being, you know, reactive, interactive content, the steeper the learning curve is going to be for that. In Storyline, there still is a good content library of templates to use, where the developers at Articulate have done the hard work for us. But if we're wanting to sort of edit those and move things around, then we as the authors need to be aware of what we're doing, because that does then start interfering with things from sort of the accessibility point of view.
So how easy do you think it is for the Articulate author? Is it all done for them? Do they need to have that in-depth knowledge of accessibility, for example, to ensure their content can be navigated by a keyboard?
So with the Rise, the templates have little option for customization, which is part of the selling point of Rise, is that it is so simple to use. They have recently rolled out a new feature, which is currently in beta testing, called a custom block, and that allows more customization from the author. But again, with that customization, there does need to be attention paid to the accessibility, manually checking that and setting the focus order so that it is still logical. So again, essentially with that increased creativity over the design comes more responsibility by the author to ensure that the accessibility criteria are being considered and met. With Storyline, I would say that you'd need to have a solid understanding of accessibility when using that software, because of the way that you build your content. Accessibility needs to inform your entire design decision at the storyboarding phase.
So drag and drop activities you've mentioned, Emma, I know they're really popular among instructional designers, but don't suit those who can't use a mouse or some assistive technology such as screen readers. What can authors do in dominKnow to get around that?
There are obviously still drag and drop out of the box activities, and you're right, they're not accessible to those using a mouse, sorry, a keyboard. It is easy to build alternatives though, and that's the thing in dominKnow, you can be a little bit more creative. So rather than have maybe a pile of cards and two drop piles, you could maybe redesign that interaction and have two buttons and a tile with 2 buttons and actions on that that provide feedback, incorrect or correct. You can go more complicated than that if you like and start putting in variables. There's a lot of options within dominKnow, and I guess that's where it's kind of, there's a similarity with Storyline, but as Emily was saying, the more creativity that you employ, the more careful you have to be with your testing and making sure you've got like your page instructions, your alt text, and you're checking that it's a logical order and things. There is one drag and drop alternative activity that dominKnow have created, which, as I mentioned, is the sort of click card sort activity. So as I mentioned, it's not quite there yet for screen reader users, but it's a really good example of how dominKnow are designing, with those alternative interaction in mind that will suit keyboard users as well. So hopefully there'll be more coming forward. But yeah, you can do quite a lot within dominKnow to avoid the drag and drop interactions.
Okay, so I'm presuming as Rise, as you said, Emily, is a heavily templated tool. Is there any alternative or similar interaction that authors can use instead of a drag and drop?
Yeah, so the sorting activities within Rise, they're not accessible currently, and there's not really a workaround for this. So again, with Rise, it's the simplicity of it, which is the selling point of why you would use it. But obviously the simplicity and the lack of customization, it does have its limitations. So I think that from an accessibility point of view, you would just need to be aware of that going into it if you are using Rise, and you'd just need to present the information in an alternative way and avoid those types of sorting activities.
Okay. What about Storyline? Does that have any alternatives?
So there is a drag and drop activity in the content library, and you can design your own, but it's not accessible to keyboard users. But there is a workaround for that type of activity. So you can create an accessible alternative, but again, that's down to the expertise of the author using the tool and going in that intentionally.
Yeah, so it comes down to, again, really that author having the knowledge of how to build that kind of interaction in the tool directly.
Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
So in terms of how these custom built interactions in Storyline are recognized by screen readers, how much needs to be done by the author in terms of applying like a keyboard focus and screen reader interpretation?
So there's definitely logic within the tool. It is there to start off with, but again, it comes down to the complexity of the design. So the more complex you're going with the design, the more variables you're adding in, and the more interactive you're making it for your learner, the more attention you need to give to that accessibility and making sure that you are manually changing some of the logical ordering of things, or at least making sure that the changes you're making are still making sense when it comes to testing.
Okay, so all about the testing is what I'm hearing, I think. Is there anything out of the box in Articulate that could be an alternative to drag and drop? Do you have to build every bit of interaction and then apply the focus order like that?
So the content library within Storyline does have other options, and it depends on your content. You could potentially use a template and customize that. The other nice thing with Storyline is that you can import other people's project files into your course, so that could be another option. But again, you need to understand accessibility and make sure that if you are importing other files, or you are using other templates, you're adjusting things, that you just know what you're doing, so that you can just make sure that it is still working the way you want it to work.
Yeah, okay. So you would need to know about logical reading order, keyboard navigation, what to expect when someone's using a screen reader. You can't import other files without testing and being confident that they're going to meet accessibility guidelines. Yeah,
I mean, I think a good way to describe it is that both dominKnow and Rise use sort of a top-down content structure. So when you're adding content to the page, the content is added sort of in a linear format, whereas Storyline, the page is sort of the size of a slide. If you've not used Storyline, then if you imagine sort of PowerPoint, you've got the canvas, and you're building layers on top of that. So the tool can certainly help with the logical focus order. But if you're doing again, complex design, you've got multiple states for objects, you've got variables, you've got multiple layers. And that's when you need to make sure that you're creating it in the correct order, or at least manually adjusting the focus order, just to make sure that the content is still reading correctly for screen readers and keyboard users.
Okay, so you really do need to have good accessibility knowledge for complex design and Articulate. So Emma, how does the logical reading order and navigation work in Domino 1?
So the logical reading order, it's pretty much automatic in Domino Flow. So just the way you build your content, it follows common sense. Authors, obviously, they need to be thinking, they need to apply a little bit of logic. So if you have, say, instructions about an interaction or an introduction to a video, build it in your content so that comes before the actual interaction or the video. So there's obviously that element. But other than that, it just picks up on the automatic, the ordering in Flow. In Claro, which is another Domino 1 product, it's slightly different. So perhaps a little bit more like Storyline, you have a stacking order in Claro. So when you build your content, you're adding the layers to sort of organize your page and the interactions. So it's easy to move those layers around and to make sure you've got a logical reading order. But again, as with everything with accessibility, you just need to be checking that your ordering is as you intended it to be. So there is that sort of extra layer of checking in Claro than there would be in Flow. And obviously it's responsive as well. So if you've got your different screen sizes and you're moving from portrait to landscape, all that will be picked up in Domino.
Okay.
Yes, and there is also the review mode. I don't know if this is the same in the Articulate tools, but if you're reviewing your course in full course preview, you can check which items are going to be picked up by a keyboard and check in your reading order that way. So that's a really useful tool as well in Domino.
So that's before it's even published. You can do a lot of your accessibility checks at that point.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. So another really key accessibility standard is ensuring that images have alt text, so that all the learners have an equivalent experience, including non-visual learners. How's that managed in Domino 1, Emma?
Okay, so in the bottom of the authoring environment, you've got the accessibility tab. So within here, you can add your alt text and something that I think is unique to Domino, which is your screen reader text. So your alt text is just for images. There is a word limit on it. Your screen reader text is something you can add to maybe more complex images or to interactions or videos that need a bit more instruction. So you have both of those fields there. There is also a little alert if you forget to add your alt text, so that's useful for the author. And it's also worth mentioning, if you upload an image into the Domino shared library and you create an alt text description at that point, every time that image is reused within other courses, then that alt text will be auto-populated. So that's a really useful feature. It can sort of streamline the content creation process as a team. But obviously, if some images can be used in a different context, so there is a little bit of caution that needs to be employed there. So yeah, the accessibility tab is a really great way to, it's a really nice, easy way to add your alt text features.
Emily, how about Rise and Articulate when it comes to alt text?
So in Rise, it's a manual task. So for each image or media item, you'd need to do that during development. But once you have added the alt text, the little label gets added to the media or image. So you can click on that if you need to edit it. It also gives it, it's a good indicator that alt text has been added. And I think it's a good time to talk about the accessibility checker tool that is in Storyline, which was sort of fairly recently rolled out, which is a brilliant aid for authors. So the checker flags issues where your content isn't accessibility compliant, and you can filter that on whether you see just AA or AAA issues. And then this tool sort of helps us fix the issues with our content, and it actually gives us some education as well, with sort of real examples. And we're able to sort of fix some of those issues directly within the checker. And if you've got some that are multiple fixes, then you can apply to all. So that sort of helps to cut down on these repetitive actions. And this is a good place where you can go through all of your alt text and sort of catch any errors. Obviously, some of the, if you're adding like a right arrow, for example, the alt text would have already been sort of added to that within the software. But say as an author, you've added a right arrow, you've duplicated that, you've turned it around, so you've used it to the left, it will still say right arrow. So that, obviously a very basic example, but it just flags where, you know, you can go in and catch that. And it's just, it's a really good tool. It's really, really helpful. I think that it is worth pointing out, though, with the accessibility checker, that it doesn't have the capability to look at the content from a design perspective. So if we have our focus order set incorrectly, it doesn't get flagged until the content's being tested with a screen reader. Therefore, the checker is good at sort of catching issues, I'd say, if it's like simple non-compliance. However, it doesn't sort of replace the need for the author to understand and design accessible content like from the outset. So if we go back to the drag and drop activity, for example, that we were discussing earlier, it would flag that it's not accessible, that there is an issue with that. But that's only helpful once you've created the content. So you've spent all the time creating that, and then you get told that it's not accessible. So again, there's not really the advice during the development process that would flag as an issue. So I would say that it's a very, very helpful tool. It certainly catches a lot of the more sort of simple non-compliance, but definitely wouldn't advise relying on the checker alone. And again, it is useful to know what you're doing, and when you're looking at design, to be doing it intentionally rather than going ahead creating stuff and then realizing after the fact that, oh, actually no, I need to now adjust things.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So Emma, is there any accessibility checking feature within Domino 1?
There's nothing like the one that Emily's just spoken about in Storyline. There's a publishing checklist just as you finish your content that can be set to mandatory before it will be allowed to publish, but it's pretty high level, so things could be missed. It doesn't check the actual content, so it's very much a sort of a reminder, a checklist for the author to go through. Very easy for things to be missed in that instance. There's in the accessibility tab that I mentioned, where the alt text and screen reader text are, there are some tips in there about checking accessibility, but again, if you don't know to look there and you don't quite understand how to build accessible content, then I don't know. It's helpful, but it's not going to check your actual content. And the same as Emily's saying, if you've got more complex customizations and designs, again, there's things that might fall through the gap. So it's all self-checking. You obviously have the full course preview that we talked about, so you can remind yourself that things have got alt text, they've been made focusable, so they'll be picked up by keyboard or screen reader, that you've got any screen reader text as well. All those things can be checked in the preview, but there's no actual tool that's going to do that checking for you. The only feature that they do have is that exclamation mark that I mentioned for missed alt text or transcriptions. So yeah, you do need some accessibility to make sure that you're meeting those compliance guidelines.
Yeah, okay. And how can a reviewer check in an Articulate course for accessibility features? Emily, can that be done before it's published in the review portal?
So currently you have to do that manually. So that would need to be done either by the author or anybody that's reviewing it, that would be sort of checking that with the external accessibility checker tools, like such as a screen reader. So there doesn't seem to be a way to actually review that within the tool currently to look at it from an accessible sort of standpoint. So using that alt text label that we were talking about before, obviously in Rise, for example, you can see that it's clearly labeled when you're editing it. So from the development side, you can see that, but that label wouldn't show up in review mode. So it doesn't even sort of show that alt text has been added. So you would need to do that manually and externally to the review mode currently.
So there's no way that reviewers can actually see whether there's alt text on images. And this information is only available to authors and those who know how to use assistive tech like screen readers then?
Yeah, at the moment, yeah.
Okay, so difference there to Domino in that in the review feature within Domino, you can actually go in and have a look and see whether an image has alt text on it as just a standard reviewer. Okay, so captions and transcripts for those who need access to media items in a different way are two more accessibility standards that are high priority. How does that work in Domino 1, Emma?
So it's nice and simple for the author to add captions and transcripts. There's no internal tool for creating your captions, but you can add a variety of different captions to videos and also audio that's set as a page narration as well. So that's one of the newer features. Obviously, they need to be checked externally before they're uploaded for accuracy and things. There is, once you've got those captions uploaded, you can choose whether to have the autoplay of the captions on or off so that they start automatically with the video. So that's quite a nice feature because we want our learners all to have, a choice over how they engage with their content, and having the captions automatically switched on, makes assumptions about our learners that we don't want to make. So captions is a nice easy one to add. And then transcripts, they're added using the same tool as well, the same editing tool. And once you've added transcript text, the learner will see on the player bar, they'll see a little icon, and then once selected, and that's by mouse or keyboard, the pop-up will open with that transcript text, and it takes automatic screen reader and keyboard focus as well. So it's all the hard work's done for you behind the scenes, basically, if you've got your files.
Okay, great. And how easy is it for authors to add these features in Rise and Storyline, Emily?
So in Rise, the closed captions need to be uploaded in VTT format, and that supports multiple language options. There's no transcript option at the moment within Rise, so a workaround to that would be adding it as a text block, but that would impact the design. In Storyline, the closed captions can be added and edited within the media file itself, or you can upload them. And they do have an AI plan as well within Articulate, so then you can use AI to create the closed captions, so that's pretty good. There is a transcript feature within Storyline, and that's done within the individual video options, so it's not in the player settings, but that transcript is then formed from the closed captions. So if you don't have the closed captions enabled, you need to do a similar workaround to the one that I just suggested for Rise, which is a little bit clunky. I would say that in Storyline you've got a little bit more sort of you've got a lot more freedom with your design, so you could probably make it a better workaround, but it's not ideal. And then with regards to like autoplay within Rise, it's just set to not autoplay, and you can't change that setting. Whereas in Storyline, you have a little bit more control over the player settings, but again, it needs to be manually disabled and checked by the author. So you need to know what you're doing in order to check, that you've got things set up as you'd need them.
So it sounds as if the author needs to have some knowledge of accessibility again to make the most of the tool, but I'm hearing that a little bit from both tools, I think. The final key accessibility standard to cover then is colour contrast. Having good colour contrast is important for those with colour blindness or low contrast sensitivity, and poor colour contrast can make parts of your content inaccessible to someone who can't see the difference between red and green, for example. What features do Rise and Storyline have to ensure learners' content has compliant colour contrast?
So Rise is quite limited in terms of the theme options. You can only choose the one main colour, and then when setting your theme you can choose auto for the colour contrast, and then the tool will help ensure that the content is automatically set to the theme and meets contrast standards. However, for the rest of the content, for example, if you have a block and you're adjusting the background colours or the text colour, that would need to be done manually using an external sort of colour contrast tool, and designed again, with that in mind from the author. Within Storyline, there's more options for the theme colours, but again, they're not guaranteed to meet the colour contrast standards. So it's a manual task, I would say, for the author.
Okay, and is that the same in Domino 1, Emma?
Yeah, it is. So you need to be using your external tools to check for color contrast. And then I imagine it's the same in Storyline. Once you've got those compliant colors, you can then add them to the theme. So once they're there, they can be reused and they're consistent. So you can use them across other courses. There's also within the theme, you can choose different button appearances as well, because there are 3 levels of color contrast you need to consider if you've got text on buttons. So that's a useful one once you've worked out your different variations for your colors. So for your buttons, so maybe if you want your next button to look one way, but you want your retry course button to look another way, you can have those determined in the theme, and then they're easy just to nice and quickly select them from the options toolbar. So that's quite useful. But yeah, there's nothing within the tool that checks for color contrast at the moment.
Okay, so basically I think you mentioned tips in the accessibility tab, and there's a reminder in the checklist.
Yeah, so it's all, there's just like little prompts just to remind you to check those things. But obviously you need a little bit of accessibility knowledge to know what's required by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which tools to use, to know it's something that you need to be looking for. So basic knowledge, but it's necessary. You can't just go in without knowing about compliant color contrast.
Yeah. Okay. So wrapping things up a little bit, what support is available from the tools vendors to help authors get familiar with these concepts and features in each of the different tools?
In dominKnow, they have their, it goes by 2 different names. So they have their VPAT, which is a voluntary product accessibility testing report, or their accessibility conformance report. So it just tells you all the features, all the WCAG guidelines, and where it meets that, where it doesn't. And it gives you some really helpful author advice, some of the things to avoid, any workaround, so that you're creating that accessible content. So that's available on the dominKnow website and their community forum. So they've got the community forum where you can search for sort of frequent queries, I suppose. It can be quite hard to navigate through the forum, though. We find there's some definite gaps. You're not necessarily going to find what you need within the forum. What they have been doing quite a lot lately is dominKnow, they've been running some really great webinars, particularly with accessibility as a focus. So they did a really great one on ARIA recently, which was sort of an introduction into the new feature that allows author to control a little bit of the markup language. That was a really great one. And they've also shown how live accessibility testing in the tool works as well. So there are some really great resources that way. And they have, I think they call it instructional designers in offices drinking coffee. They run those fairly regularly, and they often have guests on there that will talk about different themes. So they've had Susie Miller, who's like the accessibility guru. She's been on a few times. So they're good resources as well. If you're struggling with actual design in the tool, then there are weekly meetups. So there will be one of the key people, decision makers within dominKnow, and other authors that have come along to bring questions. So that can be really great if you're struggling with interaction, how to make that accessible, and they'll offer you some guidance. So that's really useful. In the tool itself, I've mentioned the accessibility tab just with those basic prompts, and there is some general basic information in the dominKnow manual, but otherwise you kind of need to be looking a little bit further afield in the sort of the webinars and things that they run.
Okay, how about Articulate 360, Emily?
So within Storyline, we've obviously already discussed the accessibility checker, so that's really, really helpful. And Articulate are really good at sort of hosting training webinars, so they do a lot of that. There's a large content of library of tutorials, either within the Articulate ecosystem or on YouTube. They also have a sort of a community, online community, which is called eLearning Heroes, and the moderators in there are really good at coming back. I mean, some of the threads are a little bit older, but they're very responsive within that forum. And I think that the thing that I love most about Articulate as a sort of product is that it's just got such a big community of users. So there's lots of other resources available out there, either on YouTube or just generally if you search online by other authors who are also sort of creating things. They found creative workarounds for things. So I think that's what I really enjoy about it, is just the sort of the wide community and the creative ideas, you know, that come out of that, and the support.
Yeah, that sounds good. So it sounds as if both software vendors are really, you know, upping their game in terms of accessibility and trying to assist authors with creating accessible content. A bit of a way to go yet, but it all sounds really positive. So thank you both for your time. It's been really valuable. So that's our session on accessibility today wrapped up. Thanks for listening.